for my first grant, which was looking at access to breast screening among really overweight women in Greater Western Sydney. And we did it in partnership with Wentworth Primary Health Network. And we've just actually wrapped up that project. So that was a great project because we spoke to lots of mammographic staff and GPs, but we also spoke to overweight women from Western Sydney about what their perceptions were around breast screening and why they might not go and screen. And the data was fabulous. So that's really funded my next, or it's not funded, but it's informed my next research project, which I've just applied for funding now.
Could you talk about that study, or is it going to be published?
No, I'm happy to talk.
Okay.
I mean, it will be published. We're
Yeah.
writing the paper at the moment, but basically there was a real disconnect between the healthcare providers and the women. So the healthcare providers felt that weight was something that shouldn't be discussed, and they didn't see it being a problem at all when women came for mammographic screening. But what the women were telling us was that it was a really horrible experience, and lots of them had had almost horrific experiences because they had really adverse events like splitting of skin underneath their breasts and that sort of thing, because they were being kind of manhandled by mammographic staff who didn't really even communicate to them about the fact that they were, really overweight.
Yeah.
And also lots of really overweight people or the women we spoke to had real body shame and didn't want to go and get mammograms because they felt so bad about it. But the worst thing is that, or the key concern, I guess, is that overweight women are more at risk of breast cancer after their menopause, and they also tend to have worse outcomes as well. So it's a bit of a critical issue for us because in Greater Western Sydney, about 79% of the population are overweight or obese, but we've got really low breast screening rates. I know it's a huge proportion, right? So we've got very high proportion of overweight people, but we've got one of the lowest proportions of breast screening. So to me, that's a really, big concern, especially when you take into context that you've got women out there who won't go because either they've had a horrible experience or they just don't want to go because they've heard about people having horrible experiences, or they just don't want to get undressed. And that's just really one part of it, because if they don't want to get breast screening, what else are they not doing? And these individuals actually need to have higher access to healthcare because of all of the other issues like diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease. So this is really being taken on board by the Cancer Institute and the Breast Cancer Institute. They're really interested in this research. And so we've actually now applied to take the research further and try and get a bit more robust data around actually how many overweight women are screened and who aren't.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's like the people who need it the most aren't getting it at all.
That's right. That's right.
Too many barriers for them to overcome.
Yeah, and also I think it's quite interesting that the healthcare providers like the mammographic staff really don't see this as being an issue at all. And so it's really trying to get them to maybe improve communication strategies as well. And I think this is a personal opinion, but perhaps we need to start treating weight as a health condition in itself, because at the moment no one will talk about it, so it's very much a taboo topic.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what would be some mitigation strategies for this issue? I mean, how would you?
Well, I think we need to start thinking about, for example, maybe the equipment that we're using. So we had some women who'd gone to breast screen vans and they had to be hoisted up on a wheelchair lift into the van because of their weight. Another woman who got stuck in the van. So you could even think about asking people about their weight before you start booking them into that environment. Maybe they have to go to the Breast Cancer Institute at Westmead, for example, to get their breast screening.
Yeah.
We certainly found that there needs to be more communication. So where the mammographic staff thought they were doing the right thing by ignoring the weight, actually it would be better for them to have open discourse about it and actually acknowledge it so that there can be appropriate handling of the women as well. We really need to think about strategies in terms of making overweight women more aware of their risk, their increased risk of breast cancer because they're overweight as well. So what we'll probably do next year, so in the meantime, we're actually going to do a project where we're linking some data with breast screen from a big cohort study to actually find out what the real rates of screening are. Where if hopefully we'll prove that the rates are quite low, we're actually going to try and develop a bunch of community-based interventions. So I'll actually work with the community and try and develop, it's almost something like a peer encourager intervention where we'll get hopefully, women who are a bit more overweight to actually go out in the community and encourage other overweight women to screen and just try and normalise it as well. But it's going to have to be done in association with the screening services. It's going to be like a twofold approach.
Right. That's interesting. Okay. You mentioned about minority groups and the challenges that they face. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the other projects we've got going at the moment is we're out in the Nepean Blue Mountains region, and we're talking to lots of individuals from different culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds about what barriers they may face in terms of getting cancer screening. So not just breast screening, but cervical screening, bowel cancer screening, and also breast screening, because I guess for me, I hate waste, and we have these 3 amazing free national cancer screening programs that aren't being accessed optimally by individuals from those backgrounds. And so some of the barriers that we're finding at the moment is that many of the older individuals don't speak English or don't have good English, and so there's a heavy reliance on either their children or the GPs to actually get them to go screening. But unfortunately, GPs aren't really stepping up to that role, and it's not necessarily the GP's fault. It's really they're very time constrained, as you probably know. Last time you went to the GP, it's how quickly can we move people through, because they're allotted a 15-minute slot. And so if you can imagine, it's quite complex anyway with someone who doesn't speak English very well and dealing with their different healthcare needs, because there's so many different competing priorities. Maybe they've got diabetes, or maybe they've got high blood pressure, and then trying to fit in that screening advice as well is really quite problematic. So first of all, individuals from cold backgrounds or culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds aren't often aware that they can actually access that free screening. And then there's the language barriers as well. So, they may not be able to speak the language, and it's difficult actually trying to get the screening done. There's also access issues, so may lack transport, definitely low knowledge, that's a real problem as well. I'm trying to think what else we found at the moment, because the interviews really are quite ongoing. There are cultural barriers as well, and we have spoken to some individuals where it's a real modesty issue. So we might need to think about, so for example, breast screening, that can be quite difficult for, women of certain cultural backgrounds and dressing in front of strangers. Right. So we really need to start thinking about strategies about how we can deal with that as well. And that's really quite important for cervical screening, because no woman likes getting cervical screening done. Not even, English women, Australian women, any woman, really doesn't like getting it done. One of the issues we've got in the Nepean Blue Mountains area is that we have lots of single male GPs, and there's a real problem there. So they're allowed to do cervical screening without chaperone, but lots of women, including myself, don't particularly like getting a cervical screen done with a single male GP. So that's one of the barriers as well, is trying to funnel women down into female GPs and still actually track their screening. It's really complex. It's a huge problem that we've got. So there's quite a few different barriers that exist there, that exist for the general population, but also some more culturally specific barriers as well that are quite a problem for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting because my dad's about 75, and he receives letters every couple of years to go get his feces checked for colon cancer. He's very diligent about it.
Good.
Yeah, because he's very. But I can imagine a lot of people just throwing away that letter.
Yeah, I think for many individuals, they don't understand why early detection is important, and that's one of the barriers we've come up against. And, it's often surprising to me, because I know that if you can detect cancer earlier, you're going to have less treatment and there's much more chance of having a longer term survival. But lots of people don't understand that. But then there's also those cultural barriers around, some people don't want to keep feces in the fridge, and that's really what it comes down to. Like, a lot of people feel really funny about it. And again, that's not just a culturally specific thing. I know my mother-in-law, for example, refuses to do this test. Yeah. So it's really trying to find out ways that make this test, more, I guess, acceptable to people, but also just trying to break down those myths and trying to break down the misunderstandings so that everyone understands why you're actually getting it done. Because I genuinely believe if you can get people to understand in their own language, on their level, why we're doing the cancer screening and that it's free, and it can have a benefit to them, then, to me, that would be pretty amazing. And then thinking about the long-term health costs as well. Our health economy is really getting brutalized by chronic disease and by non-communicable diseases, because we do have such a growing aging population. So if we can save money let's say, for example, on cancer treatments, because if you think about it, if you can get someone with early stage colon cancer, it might be a surgical intervention with a minimal amount of chemotherapy, and then they will have the same life prospects as anybody else. But if someone delays that early detection, then they're actually found at the stage where they're symptomatic, that has a massive difference in how much treatment they'll have, but also their mortality outlook too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,